Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to give our hot take review on the game we just finished playing, Circadians Chaos Order. But before we do, I do have some poll results to cover today. I asked on Twitter this week, do you think the attitude or reactions of the players around the table impact your own enjoyment or love of a game? For example, if other players aren't having fun, you will like it less. I was thinking about this question mainly just related to our format for reviewing games, right? We oftentimes play a game for the first time. And so our first exposure to a game is going to be related to that one game night. When we talk about it, maybe related to that one game night. So I think that there have definitely been some times where I probably would have enjoyed a game more on my first play if I knew that everybody else was enjoying it. And I think there's probably also some times where I might have enjoyed a game a little bit less if everybody else didn't seem to be having a lot of fun. So I think it probably does impact my view a little bit, but I don't know, maybe not completely. So we'll talk about that in a second. Here were the options that I gave on the poll. Number 1 was yes. Number 2, sometimes. Number 3, I don't think so. And number 4, no, I like what I like. So what did you guys think about this? Do you think that other people's reactions to a game impact your actual feeling, not about the game night, but about the game itself?
Yeah, I totally think it does. I've had a few experiences where there's been just one person at the table that kind of didn't want to be there, didn't want to be playing the game, like got sucked into it somehow, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, you know what, I'm not really enjoying this game, so I'm kind of just gonna bash it a little bit. And you can see it brings the whole mood down of the table, and I try to be one that livens things up and keep things happy and light, and I want it to be fun for everybody. I don't come to board game night to make it a bummer for everybody. So yeah, I have seen it where a person can bring a game down. On the other side of that, I could be playing some game that I think is horrible, and if it's 4 people I like hanging out with, it'll be the funnest time ever, having, sitting around the table, jarring, sparring, rolling dice, doing wacky things, and playing the worst game ever, but still having the best time ever. So I think the people at the table totally affect how I feel about a game. To get to the crux of your question there, Tim.
I think I misunderstood the question because I thought it was more about the game night than the game itself. And yeah, game night, certainly if someone's being a bummer, that can really ruin it. And I suppose theoretically, if I was at a table full of like real sourpusses and we were playing a game, I might harbor some, ill feelings about the evening that would rub off on the game. But I mean, generally speaking, I think I like what I like. But I actually think the more interesting aspect of the question is about game night. We all know that person who, when they get unhappy about something or they get frustrated about something, and everybody's just like, okay, walk on eggshells now because that person's pissed off and, not having a good time. So you got to be really careful. I think if anything, my takeaway from this discussion, and there were some really good answers on Twitter that I think you'll probably talk about, Tim, but it was about how much an individual can affect a game night. I mean, me personally, I certainly have times when we're playing a game and I'm not in the right mood or I don't like the game or whatever. And I try really hard not to just be a complete bummer about it. I mean, I'm sure I don't always succeed. And there are probably times when, it leaks out and makes it less fun for other people. But it's just a good reminder for us that when we are playing with other people, bring the mood up. Don't bring the mood down.
Chris, which one of us is that curmudgeon that you were just talking about?
That's probably me.
No, I thought the interesting thing was really about how whether a game itself gets impacted by you. And again, just because we are reviewing oftentimes on a first play, but I agree, game nights can definitely be impacted by the people around you. There's no doubt about that. When I answered the poll, I said sometimes, because I think there are some games that I love because I noticed that other people were just having a great time playing them. And so when I knew that game created a fun experience for other people, it made me love it more. And it's not just that the game night was good, but I think I just got more positive feelings about the game. Now that might change on subsequent plays. And I think to a small extent, probably some games that I enjoyed a little bit less and think are less fun games just because other people weren't having fun around the table. But there are also definitely been some times when like you guys were clearly having a good time playing a game and I was not having fun with it. And I do try my best to. I don't know how good I am at it, but I do try my best to just play along and do my best and have a good time. I'm sure it reflects a little bit when I'm just not having a fun time, but it doesn't necessarily make a game good for me just because you guys are enjoying it. And I've also had some games that I really, really was enjoying. I was thinking like Arc Nova or Wayfarers of the South Tigris that you guys were clearly not having a good time with, kind of grumbling about the plays, like that. This is why am I going through all this work, blah blah blah. And I'm sitting there just loving the mechanisms. And so even though I knew you guys weren't having fun, I was still enjoying it. So it's not like a always, like sometimes I can still like a game even when nobody else is, but it definitely can impact my opinion, I think.
Yeah, some examples. There's Cthulhu, Death May Die. I've talked about this. I played it the one time, and there was just a guy there who was just trying to get out of there. He wanted to end the game as quick as possible. He wasn't having any fun, and that I was like, okay, yeah, I guess since this guy isn't liking the game that much, it must not be that good. But I know if I played the game with you guys, he'd be like, look how cool this is, Adam. You can do this crazy thing right here. Did you see this before? And I'd be like, whoa, I didn't know that. So the mood of the people at the table, and if stuff's getting pointed out that you might not have noticed, like, I'm so excited about this track right here. Look at this track affects this, track affects it. Well, that could sound boring to one person, but seeing somebody so excited about something that could seem so mundane, that will like elevate me and get me excited about it too. So maybe I'm just a very easily influenced, weak-minded person, but I think, again, the mood of the table affects how good I perceive the game to be, whether I like it or not. I can't help it.
I think we're fortunate that we have a really great group. I mean, all four of us, Steve included, who's not on the show with us, but is regular at our game night. Everybody's got a really good attitude about things. And one of the things that just is, as an aside, I don't mean to go off on a sidetrack here, but one of the things that I think is nice is when folks don't go into a game feeling ultra competitive about it. I mean, everybody wants to win, right? I mean, we know that, and there can always be a little bit of like good-natured sparring and stuff like that. But I've also noticed that when we're playing a game together, there's kind of an equal number of rules calls where someone says, hey, I think you took something you weren't supposed to. And that same person saying, hey, you forgot to take this other thing that you were supposed to get. Don't forget about that. So I think that's a really nice way to play games.
Yeah, we don't have any cheaters in our group, which is awesome. That's definitely a fact. And also, generally, I agree. Like, for the most part, if we're all in a good mood, we're going to be fine, winning or losing. If we're in a bad mood, then maybe we still get a little bit grumpy, but it has more to do with just our mood coming into the night, I think, more often than it is the game or the experience.
Yeah, probably.
All right, so I've got a whole lot of answers on Twitter here. If you don't follow us on Twitter, follow us at BG_hot takes. Every week I ask one of these polls, and if you comment, I may read some of your responses on the show. Couple that stood out to me, and a lot of them agreed with us in varying ways. I think for the most part, well, I guess I'll start with the poll results here. 70% said yes. So 70% said yes, if somebody is having a really good or really bad experience, it's going to impact the game for me. But I think a lot of people misread it like Chris did based on the responses, that they were kind of more talking about like the game session was negatively impacted. And that's okay. We can go with that. 22% said sometimes. 4% said I don't think so. And then only 4% said, no, I like what I like. So, 4% are like, I am going to like the game or not like it regardless of what anyone else thinks. So good for you. That's awesome that you don't care what anyone else thinks. But most of us do have some, do feel some impact by that. So Zoe said, I'm able to dislike a game that everyone is having fun with or appreciate a design that doesn't resonate with the table. I definitely enjoy the experience more if everyone is having a good time, though. So kind of what I feel like the experience itself could be impacted by other players. Martin Bjerg said, if a game keeps the players engaged and excited, it will rub off and I will like it more. If fellow players don't like a game and are reacting, it will lessen the experience, but not my opinion of the game. Don't know why there's a difference in the positive versus negative situation. Yeah, and I think negative is definitely, it's just harder, right? Like, sometimes other people can be having fun. That doesn't make it exciting for you. So one more response I'll read here. This is Pedro. He said, recently was playing a game I don't like with people I liked and a newcomer who was having a terrible time. I was miserable. Then he resigned, and from then on, I had a good time, even disliking the game. Peeps were having fun, so I did too. His resignation was best for both worlds. At some point, we should talk about resignations. I think I'm going to do a poll on that soon because it's a really interesting topic. I mean, yeah, you don't want somebody to be sitting there not having fun. That defeats the whole purpose of game night. But sometimes resignations could actually ruin the game that you guys have already invested the time into and stuff too. So it's a complicated topic, but in that case, sounds like worked out good, Pedro. I'm glad that game was still fun for you.
Can you guys think of any game where the table felt one way about it and you felt the other way about it?
Yeah, I mentioned Wayfarers of the South Tigris, I think is a great example. And I think a good reference tonight, since we're talking about another Garphill game as well. But Adam, you were clearly miserable when we were playing that game that night. Chris, explained on the podcast that he wasn't having a fun time. And Steve, I asked him at the end of the show, he's like, well, I liked it more than this other game I didn't like very much. So, you guys didn't enjoy it at all. And I loved it. I was having so much fun going through the mechanisms. But I could sense a little bit of frustration at the table. And so I think it still brought me down a little bit, even though I was really liking the game. So that can happen, but it's harder. It's harder for that to happen. What about you, Adam? Any situations where you really enjoyed a game, even though it seemed like everyone else wasn't?
I don't know if I can attest to that, but the other way, I've talked about Outlive, and that was just a tough experience for me, whereas you guys seem to be loving it and having a great time. And I was like, yeah, this is a rough one for me. So that's the one example I can think of. What about you, Chris?
I think the best example was a pretty recent one. You guys were loving ARCs, and I was wanting to claw my eyeballs out of my head. So, I feel like that's actually one of the ones where I'm like, I really hope I wasn't being a jerk that night, because I felt like a jerk.
No, I think it's like Chris. I could tell that you weren't loving the game, but you weren't a jerk about it, right? Like you weren't throwing a hissy fit and complaining the whole time. But I could tell that you weren't, because you just have a different experience. Like I think the same thing. Like Steve told me after we played Brian Baru that one night, he's like, you clearly didn't have fun last week. But that was not a game issue for me. I thought the game was interesting. I just went into it with a really bad state of mind that night. So the whole night I was quiet. He's like, yeah, Tim wasn't talking the whole time. Clearly he wasn't having fun. And so, I think we all kind of give off a little bit of vibe of when we're having a good time and when we're not having a good time. Last week we played Viticulture after our podcast recording, and we were all laughing and talking the entire time. Like we had a fun game night that night. And so you can tell the difference between people are having a fun game night and when they're not.
One thing I'll add to that for anybody who's played a game with Tim, other than maybe the example that you just gave, Tim, he's sort of like a Muppet. Even if he's having a terrible time, he's so animated about it that it almost seems like he's having a good time, which is one of the reasons why you're fun to play games with.
Well, that's how I'm trying to be. Going back to the Outlive example, yeah, I was getting slaughtered by the game, and I was just frustrated with it, but I was still trying to make it a fun time for the table, and just being incredibly over the top miserable about how all my little clan members were not getting enough water and starving to death. And so I still try to make it fun, make my misery fun for other people.
I remember that. I thought you were pretty comical about it, which again, it's, if you're going to be having a bad time, have a bad time in a fun way.
Exactly.
Well, I remember that and I thought you were pretty angry, but
you guys could stole the water from me specifically, Tim, like 5 times.
Maybe I just have no emotional intelligence here, because apparently I think everybody's happy all the time.
That's good, Chris. That's good. That's a good state to be in. It's a good way to live. You just think everybody's happy all the time. On the other hand, it's not really a great state to be a Muppet. But, if I'm going to be a Muppet, at least I'll be a man of a Muppet, I guess. All right. Well, let's jump into a description of Circadians Chaos Order.
In Circadians Chaos Order, 2 to 5 players take on the role of asymmetric factions fighting over territory, influence, and fame on a distant planet. Your goals, strategies, and motivations are going to depend on which faction you play. Now, Circadians is a big game, and I mean big. There's about 1 million things going on. And here's a few of the basics, just to give you some context for today's review. The story arc of Circadians takes place over a series of, at least theoretically, 1 round, up to a maximum of 6 rounds, with each round broken down into a series of well-delineated steps. The action takes place on a map made up of various terrain hexes and populated by a bunch of randomly placed structures called relics. Now keep these relics in mind because they're going to play a big role in this game. There are 6 total, with 1 relic activated each round. The first step of each round is called pricing. The next 5 steps in the round involve each player deciding whether or not they're going to take a specific action associated with that step, such as research, movement, etc. During the pricing step, each player is going to select one of those actions and choose what price players will need to pay that round in order to take the action that's been priced. So for example, if one of your opponents really needs research, you may want to put a really high price on doing research that round. Now, after all actions are priced, players in turn will get the option to either take that action or to pass. Here's what the actions are in order. First is Discovery, which is essentially the research action. This lets you upgrade any of the 5 standard actions. Second is Building. This action lets players put out buildings which provide income, hold territory, and a few other things too nuanced to get into here. Third is Harvesting. When harvesting, players can earn energy, which is the basic currency of this game. They can also trigger income found on the various hexes around the board. Fourth, players can recruit. This is how you get troops on the board and activate or upgrade special superpowered leaders that can be a real force in the battles you're going to fight. Finally, players can take a move action and reposition their troops on the map, setting themselves up for combat or making a strategic play to control the relic spaces strewn around the board. Following the action phase, combat begins. It's going to happen on each hex that's occupied by more than one player. After combat's resolved, the players check the status of relics and endgame conditions. The player who controls the hex of the active relic gets to take that relic home to their player board for a bonus. And if any one player controls all of the remaining relics on the board, the game ends and they are declared the winner. I should note that each faction also has a special win condition that can trigger even if they don't control all the remaining hexes. Now, that's just a taste of what's going on in Circadians Chaos Order. There are multiple types of units, there are about a dozen different types of items that can be upgraded, there's multiple win conditions, the list just goes on and on and on and on. But for that, you're going to need to find yourself a good rules video. Circadians Chaos Order was designed by S.J. McDonald and Zach Smith and is published by Garphill Games.
All right, welcome back. So we're going to jump into the gameplay and mechanisms of Circadians Chaos Order. This game has a lot going on. This was a first play for all 3 of us. We all played on Tabletop Simulator for the first time, so we all watched Sam McDonald's rules explanation videos before we started the game. I had the rulebook in front of me, so we were referencing it frequently, but there was a lot to reference, a lot of asymmetry here. But let me just start with the thing that I think was, there was a lot that I really found interesting about this game. Let me start with one thing, though. I'll start with the combat. It may seem like a strange space to start, but the reason I want to start there is that the combat is very reminiscent of a few other games I've played, right? You can see it in the original Dune, which I think inspired Scythe, with this kind of combat wheel, this hidden information that you're displaying at the time that the combat happens. Now, I never played the original Dune, but I played Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy, and I listed that as one of my top 5 favorite combat mechanisms because I really enjoyed that little puzzle, the planning of saying like, okay, I know what's in the combat, so I'm going to be able to put a leader in there and I can put this card in there and then we all reveal it at the same time. And then depending on what happens, we give up certain stuff. So Circadians Chaos Order has a very similar mechanism here. And that you basically, when you go into combat, you have this little hidden wheel and you can put 1 tactics card on it if you have any in your hand. And that's going to potentially change the top 2 sections that your wheel is connected to. So it could be power or attack or shields. And then it may give you some special ability. But the wheel itself also changes into some interesting things. It changes whether those numbers are going to be combat or strength. There's a thing that if you move it there, you can pay a gem to roll this die. I had such a fun time with this combat mechanism every time we played it and watching how it resolved. And it's for the same reason as doing a game of conquest and diplomacy. It was a fun little mind game, but I thought it was even more fun here because there's this huge stack of tactics cards you can pull from that can completely change what can happen. None of them felt like super overpowered where I was like, oh man, I just wasted all that time. They just, they were all like within the realm of a reasonable conflict, but it was really fun effects. And then the other thing I loved about it was that you could have that dice roll randomness in the game and you had to pay a valuable gem to do it. But it's like you got to decide whether you wanted to throw that randomness into it. You could go into the combat with just as much power as you wanted to, and you don't even have to, you could leave that out. But if you wanted to take that chance and it was fun, I could go in there and be like, if I can just get the right die roll, I could win this combat. That was a fun choice to make without it having to be a thing that dictates combat, like Eclipse, right? Like Eclipse, like you are dependent on the die roll every time. This game, you could use it as a little bit of an extra, maybe I can push the combat ahead if I do this and my opponent doesn't, or if they roll poorly. I had a fun time with the combat.
The combat here was fantastic. That die roll, Tim, it was like a hedge or an insurance policy. If you wanted to add that little bonus, you could do that, but then so could your opponent. So who knows what's going on there? But you mentioned it. The tactics cards, I think, were one of the stars of the show here. So in the top part of the tactics cards, there's 2 numerical values, and those line up with the wheel as you're spinning it around. And you can change what those numerical values represent. Is it going to add to your power? Is it going to add to your strength? Is it going to add to your defense in the battle? And then those tactics card have a tactic written on them too. Some little bonus you get to do in the combat. So that was just a nice little feel there. Another aspect of the combat that you didn't bring up is player order in the combat. You get to pick which combat you want to resolve first, and that just adds another layer of strategy to the combat. Maybe you're going to retreat in that first combat back to this adjacent space, and you have more strength for a combat that's going to happen later on that same round. So a lot of layers here, a lot of things to think about in this combat.
Yeah, I got to agree with you guys. The combat was a lot of fun in this game. And there's so many analogs in this one to other games like Ankh and Kemet and Fractal even. You know, these ones where there's actual tactics involved and the cards do various things that could be beneficial or not, depending on the circumstances, that it's so circumstantial, which I think gets to your point, Tim, about none of the cards feeling overpowered. You just have to have the right card for the right circumstance. And I really thought that made it enjoyable, a really clever combat mechanism. The other thing that I wanted to point out is kind of, to me, the defining factor of the game that I thought was really neat. It was the relics. First of all, they just look cool. They're these big War of the Worlds tripod-looking things that were sent here, I guess, by the ancients, and you're trying to control them. And the idea is that you're trying to get control of those at the end of every round. There's one that comes off the board each round when it gets captured by somebody. It gives a bonus, and then at any point, if somebody controls all of the remaining relics on the board, then that person wins the game. And so I thought thematically that was a lot of fun, but I also thought it really created a nice end of round goal. So it gave something for everybody to kind of shoot towards. I'm not sure why I liked it here, because I don't like necessarily those little end of round goals. For some reason, they just frustrate me, and maybe that's one of the things I remember disliking about arcs. But in this case, maybe it was because it was the same goal every time, is that you weren't trying to accomplish some entirely different thing that's going to send you off in a different strategic direction each round, but you were trying to move yourself around the board to position yourself to be in the right spot to get that thing, the relic, at the end of the round. So it was more about positioning than it was about coming up with completely different goals.
Yeah, the relics were really cool, not only because they kind of drove conflict in certain areas, and that escalated over the course of the game. Of course, the earlier relics, a little less valuable. You know you're not going to win the game with them. It's too many to control that anyone's going to win the game on the first round. So that's not really that much of a push. But it gave you some other little bonuses. Like if you did win one of them and and the game didn't end that round, you get to take that relic and put it on your board and get some immediate bonus for it. So you're still motivated to go after those relics. And we saw it grow, like as we get further and further into the rounds, all of a sudden it's just driving more and more conflict to these relics because, we know that it's going to have a bigger impact. And if I can set up control here, then I'm setting myself up for the next round. It was really cool. I want to talk about the other thing that I thought was really, again, there's so many things I could talk about here, but asymmetry in this game is something I want to touch on. So it has a lot. It has a lot of asymmetry. Each of the factions has unique leaders that can also be upgraded, and they all have different abilities. You have very unique faction abilities, unique strengths that they have, and they're kind of determined by these set of cards that you have. What are they called? Attributes that can also be upgraded. So those
Attributes.
Yeah, so those can be flipped over and upgraded as well. So those are different per faction. And then on a couple of the factions, there was like really, really unique behavior. Like mine had these few extra kind of like leaders that I could recruit, or you guys could recruit, or if we got into combat, you could steal them. They're kind of these like vigilante characters, but only my faction had those. If you're not playing with my faction, you would never see those characters. Adams had this really cool drop ship. Like he didn't have a standard base like the rest of us did. He had this little ship that would move around, and that was kind of his base. It determined where he could place his ships, where he could deploy his people and stuff like that. So there was some cool asymmetry there. And then there was like the end game. There were two end game opportunities here. One was that you could control all the relics that were on the board, and the other is each of us had a unique end game goal that we were going for. Like Chris's was that he had to get like 20 upgrades in the game. Mine was that I had to win 5 combats with a leader in the combat. So we each had very different goals that could happen there. So a lot of asymmetry here. I've complained a little bit about Root, for example. It's, your very popular asymmetric game, and that is that it feels like everybody's got to play a different game, right? You've got somewhat of a rule set, some basic components, but the game's different. This I felt was a little bit easier to kind of get in and play the game. Like the basic rule sets drove most of what happened. There was definitely some differences. You each had a double-sided kind of player board that you had to read. You had to understand what they could do. And it drove how that faction worked and kind of the setup and stuff like that, but it didn't feel quite as significant as Root. However, it's not all good, right? It's like what I said about Cthulhu Wars when we reviewed that. It's still hard because it's so asymmetric. It's hard to know what everybody else has going on around the table. Until you played this game many times, you're not going to know for sure what their leader's strengths or abilities are, unless you're like stopping the game and saying, wait, let me go and look at your whole tableau over there, see what's going on. Let me look at your player board. So there's enough asymmetry where it makes it hard to really understand the table presence. Like with Cthulhu Wars, I think with this one, I kind of went into every combat going like, well, I've got a leader and a handful of troops. He's got a leader and a handful of troops. I'm just going to go in there and like throw the dice and see where it lands. And obviously you could play that more strategically and really delve into it. But I think that's the challenge with this type of game, is that you can't play it really strategically and play well until you've played it many times.
Yeah, for this one, for me, it wasn't as difficult to understand kind of what was going to happen in combat as much as something like Root, for instance, or Cthulhu Wars, I think was really difficult. I have no idea. Some guy pops up out of the ocean, and then this other guy flies across the world, and now you're just getting slaughtered by everybody without even knowing that they can do that. That's kind of how I felt in Cthulhu. Where here, I could take a look and just go look at Steve's characters and, okay, I can compute it out. He's going to have 9 strength. I'm going to have 12 strength, and then he might be able to roll a dice and get some more. So it felt a little easier to me to figure out what was going to happen. Yeah, there was a lot of attributes and a lot of leaders you had to take a look at and figure out what exactly was going, but it wasn't anything too crazy, I didn't feel. But yeah, Tim, you're right. I have to concede. You're not going to really have an amazing strategic intelligence in this game until a few plays down the road, whether that's, probably Tim will have it mastered in 3 or 4 plays versus me, like 20 to 30 plays, somewhere in that neighborhood. Who knows? It's going to be different per person. But I think what ties it all together is like what Chris said. I'm going to talk about these relics some more. They come out in numerical order. You can see where they're all laid out, 1 through 6. Where these epic battles are going to be occurring, or at least the potential for these epic battles. So that kind of ties this game together. There's going to be these battles for these relics, and that I want to mention something that you touched on also, Tim, the multiple win conditions. So if you control all the relics, that's a win condition. How cool is that? So by rounds 4, 5, and 6, round 4, there's only 3 relics left. Round 5, there's only 2 relics left. In round 6, there's just that 1 relic left. So, if no other faction is close to their individual win condition, it's going to add this tension. It's going to force combat. I really think that those relics are kind of the thread that pull all this asymmetry together and give it some focus. So I'm glad you brought that up, Chris.
So sticking with the asymmetry, I think I need to disagree with my colleague, the distinguished gentleman from California. I think this game has more asymmetry, was more challenging in terms of its asymmetry than Cthulhu Wars is. Because in Cthulhu Wars, it's almost universally about how the characters fight and how the characters move. In this one, you had that same thing. You had the different fighting styles, but every different character, every different card potentially, I'm thinking about those cards like Tim had, which were essentially characters. Each one has powers. But in addition to what's happening with combat, each individual player has a set of benefits that are not necessarily combat powers. I had all kinds of benefits related to research and economic things. And one thing that really kind of stymied me was the different end game goals. It wasn't entirely different game type of end game goals like in Root, but for example, Tim had these 2 ways that he could get his end game scoring points. He could either win combats or he could get relics. And at one point I was like, oh, so Tim just needs to get relics and he wins the game. And he's like, no, that's not my primary way of getting points. And it turned out it was actually his primary way of getting points. But, there's enough confusion there about what the person is actually trying to do that it was actually a little bit challenging. So I think how someone feels about this game is going to have a lot to do with how they feel about asymmetry. Because everybody has some kind of feeling about it. Some people want zero asymmetry. If you want zero asymmetry, this is not your game. Some people want intense asymmetry, and maybe then the game you want is root. I think on the continuum, I would put it at Cthulhu Wars, going to the more or the asymmetrical side of the scale. You then go to this game, Circadians, and then beyond that, you get to root. So I think this kind of falls in the middle somewhere. And whether that's a sweet spot depends on your taste.
And I'm going to let Tim yield the remainder of his time back to me and say, yeah, Chris, you bring up a good point. I think, so there's a difference here, right? I think in Cthulhu Wars, there's less things that do things more wildly. And I think here in Circadian's Chaos Order, there are a lot more asymmetric things, but each individually does them to a lesser degree than the few things in Cthulhu Wars that do them to such a huge, chaotic, asymmetric degree. That's the kind of where my brain's feeling right now. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Well, this does have chaos right in the name of it, so I don't know that you could say this is more chaotic. I think, you guys are right both on the same page. I think it's approximate to Cthulhu Wars and just different ways to think about it. And when Adam got in and started playing Cthulhu Wars, Chris and I had played it a dozen times already. And so to Adam, it probably felt overwhelming that we were clearly doing these things that were obvious. I think after a couple plays of Circadians, the factions, would be clear. The win conditions on the factions are pretty easy to kind of grasp. But they're very different, right? So it's like you have to know that so you could stop. Like, we need to know to price Chris out of that upgrade track because that's his win condition. So, I think it's probably approximately there, just a little bit different. Let me jump into a different thing here, which is that this is basically a troops on a map game. It's an area control game, but it's such a Euro engine builder at the same time. Like, this game has just engines on top of engines on top of engines in a way that I really loved. Like, you've got these upgrade tracks that allow your actions to get stronger. You can upgrade your combat ability with your leaders, put buildings out on the board, which give you more income and also give you new abilities, ways to get around the board. Like, there are so many things that you can do, but you can't do them all. This is a game where after one play, I was like, I don't think you would ever have one track to go on or one track to master. I think you're going to play a little bit tactically, a little bit strategically, and just try to find the best fit for this particular game. And I would even say, in a way that I think Garfield, I love the games that I played of theirs, but they tend to be really, the ones that I played, especially in the West Kingdom series, they tend to be really focused on, like, you're going to do well if you focus on one specific goal. Like, you do this one thing really well. And I feel on one play that I think Circadians is going to drive you to do a little bit of several things, but you can't just do one single thing, and you're not going to be able to do everything at all. So it's like, for me, this is really fun because it means every game is a new exploration. Every game is well, what's the best move for me right now? Because they priced me out of these other three actions, so I might as well optimize on this one action and do the best I can with it. But I don't see how you'd ever upgrade everything, plus get to the top of the recruit track, plus win all these relics. Like, you got to kind of pick your battles, and this is so fun for me. It's such a fun little puzzle every time that I'm playing it. So loved that it was a big engine builder along with an area control game.
Tim, I was wondering where you're going to get to the more resource management aspects. All you ever want to do is talk about combat. You're always like area control and fight. But yeah, you even said it during the game. There's these tracks that were so reminiscent of Gaia Project. I thought there was a lot of elements of this game that reminded me of other games, and that's one of them. You have these tracks going up. You have a track for research where you can, if you do that action, you decide to go up another track so you can research the research, and that makes your research action stronger. And then you have tracks to do your typical stuff. You can recruit dudes, you can get better movement, and they all have this little default action. And you can do the luxury action, is what Sam called it in his video. Pay a little extra and do the bonus. So yeah, Tim, you nailed it. Just some of the more resource management, puzzly, non-fighty actions in this game. The engine building aspects in this game were very cool.
So on the engine building, I think, to me, this is one area where there was a bit of a missed opportunity. I'm not going to say I didn't enjoy it, because I actually love engine building, and I really enjoyed the engine building here. But I think one thing that left me feeling a little bit flat was how slowly and gradually the engine built. My guys were all about upgrades. It was research and moving up these research tracks. And by the end of the game, I was near the top of all these research tracks, but the benefits grew so slowly with them. On the researching your research track, there was, I think, 4 different promotions that you could make, or 5 possibly, and you didn't actually get a really significant benefit. In other words, being able to do a second research action until the last one. So you had to go up 4 times, getting basically the same benefit with maybe getting an extra card or something like that, until you actually got something big. And then in the movement points, you go up once, you go from 2 movement points to 3 movement points. The next time, 3 movement points to 4 movement points. And that just didn't feel that huge to me. And I'm thinking about it in the context of Gaia Project, because you guys just brought that up. And for example, there you have the movement track where it actually takes two researches to go up 1 additional move. But in Gaia Project, being able to move an extra space could be the difference between winning and losing the game. I mean, it's humongous. In this one, it didn't feel so much, but you still have to pour a lot of your heart and soul and time into getting these researches that didn't seem to make that huge of a difference to me in a lot of ways.
Well, Chris, I'm going to disagree with you there, because I do think it felt a lot like Gaia Project, and it takes about the same amount of effort to get what feels like minimal benefits. And in Gaia Project, they may be a little bit more impactful when there's that shift, but here you generally got immediate benefits more than you do in Gaia Project for moving up a step. So if you get up a step and it doesn't give you anything as a part of your engine, it usually gives you an immediate benefit. And then you always have that opportunity to take the kind of the bonus action with it as well. So to me, it felt very approximate. In Gaia Project, early games, hey, I got like 3 movements up those tracks. Why did I even bother doing this thing? And that got better, right? We get more efficient at that. Like today, we're playing a game of Gaia Project on Board Game Arena, and I got to the top of the terraforming track, or whatever it's called, by the second round. So like, it's just, this is something I think you're going to get better at and find out where you need to focus in a game with this game. To me, it feels approximate. I like where it is. It's hard. It's not easy to do these things. And it's not going to like win you the game because you move up quickly up a track, but it still gives you some fun benefits as you're moving up it.
Right now, I have the same feeling about those tracks that I did when I first started playing Gaia Project. Like, oh, I can't get up these things. What are these bonuses going to give me? And then I can see, oh, this gives me a nice little, oh, if I do this first and then this, holy cow, that's going to give me tons and tons of stuff. So it's a matter of, I think the puzzle's there. It's a matter of figuring out the right way to do it, the right order to do it. And yeah, it gives me that nice engine building kind of feeling. I also liked the ability to price these tracks out and kind of anticipate what somebody else might want and slap a huge price tag on it and keep them from potentially going to that track. This reminds me, we've been talking a lot about Dune, original Dune, a little bit of the way the Emperor acts and the Spacing Guild, the way they behave. There's this whole auction around in Dune, and whatever spices bid for that card goes to the Emperor. And similarly, for moving around, for getting troops onto the board itself in Dune, you have to pay the Spacing Guild. Well, here that kind of is variable. You want to control the Discovery track this round? Well, boom, slap a big price tag on it. You want to control the Harvest track this round? You put a big price tag on it. I really enjoy that aspect of being able to control. It's like a streamlined sort of auction in a way. I thought that was nice. Another nice aspect to those tracks.
I really like that too. I didn't think I was going to, but by the time we started playing a round or two, I really liked that. I thought it was interesting. And maybe that was because you guys kept letting me get that Discovery track. I'm not sure why you kept letting me do that, but yeah, I thought that was a neat aspect of it.
Yeah, so listen, we've talked a long time about these mechanisms, and there's like a dozen more that we could talk about. And so I'll just kind of end the gameplay and mechanisms thought, or this is the last thought for me anyway, and that is that there is a lot of mechanisms here. It makes the game hard to approach, right? It took us a lot of effort to learn to sit down and play this game, and we struggled through the first couple rounds of playing the game. A lot of rules checks, a lot of iconography to look at, a lot of language that was used on the cards. That at one point I'm reading the rule book and I couldn't figure out what this one term was. I couldn't find it anywhere, and I finally searched the PDF of the rule book. And it says, oh yeah, this one faction has to check their faction player aid so that you know what the terminology is. But the terminology is referenced on several cards and stuff. It's not a super approachable game. And on top of that, it's a very long game. It's a game that is going to take 3 to 4 hours once you know how to play it, right? So it's not just like a first play thing. I think this is a game that's going to take an afternoon to get through on a play. So those are my only, real negatives with it, is that it's going to be hard to get to the table. But I'll talk about, how that impacted me in my final thoughts. So let's talk about the production and theme of Circadians Order.
So the first thing I noticed, production here, I'm going to talk about the art. I think that's what sort of kept me away from Circadians First Light, and I didn't want to take a look at that. And then the art here again, it was just something about it was just a bit of a turnoff, at least initially. But then the more I started looking at it, the more these little characters grew on me, and they're kind of like goofy and zany looking, and it's not too intense. It's not your serious, I don't know if serious is the right word. It's not your more intense art like you see in Fractal, that kind of dark cinematic, I don't know how you want to say it, kind of alien theme, sort of like Nemesis kind of art, hard sci-fi and dramatic worlds. This is a little more on the, cartoony side of things. So that initially was a bit off-putting, but it grew on me as we played the game.
I agree 100% with Adam. This art reminded me so much of Gaia Project.
Yes.
Like the monkey guy in the spacesuit and all that. And it's, it's fine. It didn't hurt the game very much, but it's not my style. I do like the hard sci-fi. I like things dark. I like things that are a little bit kind of scary and realistic looking. And this is definitely on the more cartoony end of things. So, I don't want to bust on it too hard, because it's not that it was bad. It was just not my style. The one thing that I think is a little bit of a bummer in this is that you've got these relics, which are incredibly cool. They should be these giant towering edifices that take over the board, like there's, they look in the drawings, but they're just little, well, not little, slightly larger meeples. I think this is a place where you really could have had a mini that goes on there for the relic, and I think that would have made a huge difference. Other than that, it was a colorful board. There was not much about this that made me unhappy. I thought it was a perfectly fine production.
Chris, everything isn't better as a mini, and this is an example where I think it wouldn't be better as a mini, because you had to have those big numbers. It needs to be very clear which region you're going for in that round of the game. And in this case, it was a big, black, wooden piece, huge wooden piece in the middle of the board with a number clearly printed on it. I thought it was totally fine. Now, it doesn't feel very sci-fi because it's wood and not plastic, metal, whatever. So I get that, but I don't think it needed to be. Now, I want to go back to the art here, though. This is Sam Phillips is the artist, and he's also done the art for several other Garphill games, including Hadrian's Wall, and then there's a couple other in the historical series, the replacement for Raiders of the North Sea, the more recent upgraded version of that, etc. So he's done art on several of these games. It is a very distinct art style. I'll give you that, and I can understand if you don't love it. I personally think it's really cool. I think it's interesting. He's got some really interesting humanoid characters going on here and interesting landscapes and things like that. So I like the art. Here's what I didn't like, and that is the board itself is made up of these hexes, and the hexes are supposed to represent different territory types. And there's 3 territory types plus like your starting bases, plus there's some mountains and things like that. And it's a very colorful board. Like, I think the table presence is really cool here. Like, I love the board laid out. I like the kind of pastelish colors that come up in it. But the territory types were hard for me to distinguish, and they didn't represent the types they were supposed to be very well. Like, one is supposed to be ridges, and to me it looked like a desert. And one was supposed to be like meadows, and it looked like spiky mountains. And then another one was the swamp. Well, the swamp looked like a swamp. But they were hard to distinguish with the terminology. So that was my only complaint about the art, is that the board itself didn't lend itself to a very good user experience, although it looked really cool.
I agree with you, Tim. It's funny, the terminology there. I think it's cliffs, or the ones that look like that you called ridges that look like mesas, and then I think it's plains that you called meadows that look like, I don't know, hoodoos or something, spikes. So yeah, I have to agree with you. Terrain it's got silly names for what it's trying to describe. And yeah, the color palette here is interesting. The most vibrant thing are the score trackers around the outside of the board to me. You got this bright orange and red and green. So those are the things that pop. Do you want to be popping on the score trackers? Maybe so. But yeah, you mentioned the user experience here, the icons, the iconography got a little overwhelming for me. They have lightning bolts instead of, usually that means instant, right? You get this right away if it's a lightning bolt. Here that means energy. There was some other icon for you get it right away. Push a button. A guy pushes a button with a hand, pushes a button. Never seen that one. And what else? We were a little bit confused on the upgrade stuff.
But like upgrading characters versus upgrading your
Yeah.
there was a, and the funny thing is like there is in the rule book there is an entire page of the rule book dedicated to iconography, and I swear to God there's like 70 icons on there, and then there were still icons that were not on that page that I had to go and like find in the rule book about that specific section to tell what it did. So yeah, we went a little icon heavy here.
Yeah, I was gonna say that if you guys hadn't, that was freaking brutal.
At the same time, I don't think it's any worse than something like Fractal or Voidfall or even Eclipse. Eclipse has giant trifolds explaining what each of the little discovery tiles do and each of this thing and what does this thing mean, all that. So it's just like, I don't know, anything else after a few plays, you're going to have it down, be like, oh yeah, that means this. And yep, I was confused about it too. So first blush, pretty confusing. After a few plays, I think it's going to sink right in.
It was a little worse than that game and most other games that I've ever played. Like the iconography was probably heavier and a little harder to distinguish than most games. And what's funny is that like Garpill's games, I think generally I feel really good about the iconography. Generally, there's a decent amount of it, but it's a little bit more clear to me in other games I've played. No, but this is also a heavier game, I think, than any of their other games that I've played. And so part of that heaviness comes from just the vast different mechanisms and options that you have, and so some of that's going to come with more iconography if it's going to be language independent like that. So let's talk about the theme a little bit though, because one of the things I really actually enjoyed about this as I was playing the game is that these factions were very thematic. I thought it told a really interesting story. Adam was playing the Circadians, who are these like basically Earth folks that have traveled to this other planet. And so that's why they don't have a base to start with, right? These other factions live on this planet and they are already, conflicting and fighting, and they have their own, they're kind of ingrained and stuff like that. But then the Circadians, they come down here and their whole goal is to colonize the planet. That's how they win the game. But they're coming down with their dropship and dropping their military off, and they've got all this extra military firepower and armor and all that stuff. My faction were these, these locals, tribal battlers and stuff like that. But then with them comes a whole bunch of these other regional guys that don't want to be part of my faction, even though they're the same species. But some of them, I can pay them. If I pay them, then they'll stay and work with me, but they also may go join somebody else's side. So really cool theme, I thought, written into each of these unique factions. And I think if you're going to do asymmetry, do it for a purpose. And they did a really good job here. I think, there's a lot of story being told with the asymmetry and why one faction does one thing better than another faction.
I totally agree, Tim. I think the theme made the production very forgivable. The theme was cool here. I liked hearing about all these different factions and what they could do. I loved the little dropship thing that I had, moving around, flying these guys around. My soldiers were all tough. I don't know if that was like a reverse Superman thing where the people from Superman planet come to Earth and they're super mega tough. You take guys from Earth and put them on this planet and they're like twice as strong as everybody else. I thought that was cool. I like Steve's little, was it Steve's that had the water faction that he didn't even use the water on? That seemed like it could have been cool, but we didn't get to see it.
Yeah, that was his.
Of course, there's like the science faction. There's always a science faction, and so some of them were a little tropish, but I had fun with all of them, and I want to learn about all of their little story, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Oh, the one last thing I want to mention about my faction was that I got victory points if I won a conflict with an opponent's leader in it. And they kind of look to me a little bit like the Predator characters, not exactly, but a little bit. And so I was thinking like, oh yeah, that my characters, they just want to get trophies. That's how they get fame on this planet, is if they can get trophies, they get the heads of the other leaders. So I thought that was a fun story. I was telling myself, I'm like, I gotta get that guy's head.
I wish I understood the story better. I actually tried to find some of it online before the game, and I wasn't very successful at it. So I sort of very generally got the sense of what the story was, but I wish I'd known it a little bit better. I was thinking about Adam's character in the colonizing Earth people, and it made me think of that old episode of Twilight Zone where there's the space aliens that are attacking the little old lady in the farmhouse, and then at the end you find out that the space invaders were actually people from Earth. So pretty wacky stuff.
All right, well, why don't we jump over to our final thoughts, and would you request to play this game again? So I'll start here. The game, it goes long, and it's hard to teach, right? It's going to be hard to get new people into. So it's hard to ask for this game, But yes, I want to play this game again, right? I complain all the time about length of games and why I'd rather play a few other games instead of one single game in an afternoon. This is a game that I want to go back to and spend an afternoon exploring and playing. I feel like there's a lot of exploration here. There's a lot to discover. It's just everything about this combination of the player interaction, which was driven by the conflict on the game, but also the engine building and the strategies I could build towards and the variety in that deck of cards that we can start to explore a little bit more. I want to go back and I want to play this game again, like right away. It is a game that I'm not typically going to be able to do on a game night for 3 hours. I think you need 3 to 4 hours at least to play this, especially with 4 or 5 people if one or two are new at it. But I'd love to. This is a game that if I'm going to spend an afternoon playing one game, this right now is the longest game that I would choose to play that I've had a chance to play so far.
Yeah, it's tough to want to play a long game like this with all these rules and all these kind of edge cases potentially out there. But yeah, I want to play this one again as well. We talk a lot about, is the rules overhead worth what you get out of the game? I think it is here. The asymmetry was fun to me. It wasn't super overwhelming. It didn't seem chaotic, even though chaos is in the name. I had a lot of fun playing this game. I'd like to sit down for an afternoon where I'm not rushed, where there's 5-6 hours. Hopefully I don't need 5-6 hours to play it. Hopefully it gets done in, like you said, Tim, 3 or 4 hours. There's a lot to get through here, but I think it'll reward subsequent plays, and different strategies will emerge and different kind of stories will be told from it. So yeah, I very much want to play this game again.
I agree with a lot of what you guys said. This is a game that I really enjoyed and I really want to play again. But after I play the next game of it, the real question is, am I going to want to play it a third time? Because there's always that question of the investment in time. And if I've got that kind of time, would I rather play this game, or would I rather play Eclipse, or would I rather play something, some other big epic 4X like that? And I'm not entirely sure, because there was a lot about this game that was really enjoyable, and it definitely had a slightly different feel than Eclipse, in that this was more oriented toward the engine building and the economics and the research, all of which is a part of Eclipse as well. But I felt like this game put a little bit more emphasis on some of the non-combat parts, which could be very attractive to some players. I think that I probably would enjoy playing it regularly if I had the time to do it. And I think that really is what this comes down to, is I probably would not invest in this one because I would just get it to the table rarely enough. And there's probably other games that could give me similar feels in less of an investment. Now, I'm curious, for a game like this, do you think that you would totally break this game by saying, hey, let's just play it for 4 rounds, or let's play it for 3 rounds and make it a 2.5 hour game or 3 hour game instead of a 4 to 6 hour game?
I don't know, Chris. I think that's a good question. I think the game could still be fun at 4 rounds and would definitely shorten it a bit. Especially as you get into the later rounds, there's a lot more combats happening. There's a lot more calculations that have to happen in those rounds and things like that. It's something I think would be worth querying Sam McDonald, the designer of it, and just kind of asking him if they tried it and what they think about it. And not that I ever want to recommend to a designer, hey, we want a house rule your game, what do you think about this? But I would assume that they put some thought into that, because the length of a game obviously can impact the approachability of it. And it's probably a game that would speed up a bit too with multiple plays. I think quite a bit, right? We spent a lot of time in the first couple of rounds looking through rules and checking iconography. And so I would wonder if we could get this down to a Eclipse length after a second or third play, which Eclipse is now like a 2.5 to 3 hour game for us. And that's pretty manageable on a game night. This might go the same way. Now, this game, as far as the difference with Eclipse for me, if I was going to invest the same amount of time, is that I like both of them. I like that there's an economy. I like that there's player interaction. But Eclipse is so luck based sometimes. The searching for tiles and the dice rolls and the combat, and that can be so painful on a long game. And I just didn't feel that here. I didn't feel like everything I was doing, it felt like I was going towards a strategic purpose. Now, someone could mess with my plans. Something might not go my way, but it didn't feel like it was down to luck. It felt like, how well did I plan it? How well did I outthink my opponents and kind of set myself up for the future? Eclipse has some of that, right? And I love Eclipse, but sometimes you can just lose the game on one bad dice roll or flipping a couple exploration tiles that just don't work as well as your opponents. So at least in this case, I think the length of time, I'm never going to feel bad that I just spent that time. I'm going to feel like I accomplished something, like I developed something, and that I got to push towards this goal. So I don't know. Yeah, it's a tough question, but it's a game that I definitely want to dig into a little bit more.
Yeah, Agreed, Chris. Good point about, hey, on the third play, is it going to be one that you want to come back to? I don't know. I think there's at least a few more plays to explore here for me, and at this point, I'm rearing to get back in there. Yeah, when am I going to find the time? When am I going to find 4 or 5 hours to get through the full length? If everybody went in saying, hey, we're just going to play 4 rounds, I think there's a good game there too, Chris. So that's another good point. I know a lot of questions and a lot to be explored here, I think, with Chaos. What is it? Chaos First Order?
Circadians Chaos Order.
Got that one wrong.
All right, so that'll wrap up our conversation on Circadians Chaos Order. It's been like 6 weeks since we did one of these review episodes, so obviously we're pretty verbose tonight, talking a lot about this one, maybe because it's been so long. But let's jump into one of Chris's themed cocktails, as well as some games that have been on our table right after this. All right, welcome back. Chris, what do you have for us this week?
Well, first of all, wow. It's been a month now of top 30 lists and listener appreciation. And so, for one, it's just so fun being back to our bread and butter here. And it's a lot of fun being back to talking about drinks. So this week, I'm going to be doubling down on the chaos aspect of Circadians Chaos Order with a tasty treat that's called the Waters of Chaos, which I'm bringing to you courtesy of diffordsguide.com. For the sake of thematic fidelity, I guess we'll just go ahead and say that those little water hexes that are out there in the middle of the board game, that those are the Waters of Chaos, I guess.
Perfect.
Anyway, adding to the chaos, I made some fairly significant adjustments in this recipe, which I'll get to when I talk to you about the ingredients. And suffice to say that this is not exactly the drink that Difford's intended, but I think it's pretty good all the same. So here's what you're going to need. 1.5 ounces of gin. Now the recipe calls for Genever, which is a sort of precursor to gin with some similar but not entirely identical flavors. I favored the gin basically because it's easier to get. You can get it pretty much wherever you are, and it's very easy to find. And it also tastes great. You'll also need 1/4 ounce of rum. Now here's change number 2, and maybe a little bit more significant. It's also for the sake of easy availability, but the recipe calls for white overproof rum, which most people don't have sitting around. And for those who haven't tried it, it's this very distinctive, very funky, almost banana-like flavor. Personally, I'm not a big fan, so I was happy to try a different type of rum. I actually tried a couple, and each one changed the flavor profile of the drink a little bit, but I thought they all tasted really good, so I'd say use what you got. You'll also need 1/4 ounce of green chartreuse. Now, this is the one less common ingredient that I can't really sub out. You have to use the chartreuse. But I can say that if you go pick up a bottle of it, there are some other really great cocktails that you can make with it, so I don't think it would go to waste. Personally, I think it's worth the investment. You'll also need 3/4 ounce of lime juice, 1/2 ounce of sugar syrup, and the recipe also calls for 1/3 ounce of water optionally, which personally I'm perfectly happy to skip. So you're going to shake all these tasty ingredients together with a bunch of ice and then pour it, ice and all, into a double old-fashioned glass. Now, the official recipe says to strain it over ice, but I prefer the so-called dirty pour because it tames a little bit of that strong flavor from the heavy booze, especially if you leave out the water. I think it helps to leave the ice in there. So just be careful when you make these because these suckers are strong. So don't be surprised if a couple of these will bring a little bit of extra chaos to your game. Cheers.
Is that why your performance was so poor tonight, Chris? Was it the extra booze in those drinks?
I think I was ahead.
No kidding. So actually, it's funny. I wanted to make this drink, and I went and tried to find this green chartreuse liqueur. I searched. The Total Wine by Me is just massive, and there's like a full aisle of liqueurs there. So I browsed for like 15 minutes. Finally found somebody to help me. He's like, I think we're out of it. So he searched it up. He's like, yeah, we're not getting back till August. So then I went to the Bevmo by Me. They also were out. So apparently there is a regional green chartreuse liqueur shortage in my area, so I didn't get to try this tonight, but sounded great. All right, well let's talk about some games that have been on our table this week.
Guys, I've been playing a game called Radlands. I talked about this on our top 10. I think it was my number 10. It just snuck in there. This is a game designed by Daniel Pishnik and published by Roxley Games. Roxley Games, who's been getting quite the reputation for fantastic publications, and they do not miss here with Radlands. There's a few different levels. There's deluxe and super deluxe and just kind of okay. But I have the super deluxe, comes with a couple neoprene mats and clicky clacky water tiles, super thick, almost heavy cards that feel fantastic in your hand. The color here is this beautiful, I don't know, purple and orange and bright, vibrant, sort of 80s synthwave art. What are you doing here in this game? Well, you are establishing 3 base camps, and you're trying to recruit different people in this post-apocalyptic world where water is super scarce, and you're putting them out there in your tableau kind of to protect these base camps. So you put them in front of each. You're going against another player who's doing the same thing. Each of these cards has these just crazy powers that they can do. Eventually, you're trying to destroy the other person's 3 bases. And how do you do that? Well, the players have powers. You have these events that you can also play, and you can see those coming. They're either going to happen 3 turns from now, 2 turns from now, 1, or some of the events are instant. That can either take out one of the other characters' players on their tableau. Sometimes it takes out your own characters and causes massive damage to their... Anyway, all these different crazy powers of all these cards. The flavor text on these cards is great. You're looking at them and reading them. The art on these cards are great. Just these crazy characters doing these ridiculous things to try to take out your opponent's bases. It's a back and forth tug of war. Is there that much strategy here? It's difficult to make a plan and be able to enact it. So when you are able to do that, it feels really, really great. A fun game. Sarah and I have been playing this one ad nauseum when we have the time. It takes about 20 minutes to play. It takes about 5 minutes to set up. That's why it's been hitting the table so much, and I've been having such a good time with this one, Radlands. You guys have any questions about it?
I want to play this game so badly. I hope you bring it next time we're together playing games in person, because I really want to try this. I have not played this game, or I think one exactly like it. So what other games could you compare it to that'll give you some of the same sort of feels?
Yeah, Chris, good question. This game reminds me of a couple other games. One of them is Omen, Reign of War. That's by John Cloudis. And in that game, it's similar. You have the 3 bases. They're kind of in the middle of the board, and each player is battling over those 3 regions between the 2 instead of having your own separate bases. And it also reminds me of a game called Air, Land, and Sea, which I've talked about before. And that also has the 3 theaters, Air, Land, and Sea, in the middle that each player is vying for as well. So again, Radlands has the bases on each player's side. So each player has a set of 3 bases that they're trying to defend, whereas in Omen, Reign of War and Air, Land, and Sea, there's the 3 bases in the middle that each player is fighting over. Well, Omen, Reign of War is sort of chaotic, super chaotic. To me, it feels like you can't plan much or devise much of a strategy. It's very tactical. What are you going to do this turn to get yourself an edge? Whereas Radlands has a little bit more planning, and even more so with Air, Land, and Sea. I really like how Air, Land, and Sea does it with if things aren't looking good, you can concede and kind of mitigate how much you're going to get hosed, and you're building up points over a series of rounds. Whereas in the other 2 games, you're just going at it until the game's over. So yeah, all 3 games kind of similar, but different enough.
Is there a lot of duplicate cards in the deck? Does it feel like you're starting to see the same cards over and over again? And would this benefit from an expansion that adds more variability if you're going to be playing this a lot?
I think this game is absolutely perfect for an expansion. But in general, no, there's not that many duplicate. There's 2 cards. From what I can tell, there's 2 of each person. And then there's, I think, 5 or 6 or 7 more expensive cards that are singular and unique. And if you can get one of those characters out there with a little bit of protection on them, you can cause some serious damage to your opponent. So more about these cards. They're pretty amazing. They're also a resource. So if you can get these cards in your hand, that's fantastic. They all have a little icon in the top left. And if you just want to discard one of those cards, you could do that action that's in the top left. Otherwise, you can pay the cost, typically in water, to put this card out in your tableau. Then when they come out, they're not ready. Usually you have to wait a turn to be able to use their action that the card provides. So in the meantime, your opponent can see what you're trying to do and they can counter that. So they have a bit of a second or two to see what's going to happen, what you're trying to do, so they can counter that up. Additionally, your bases all have power. So you start by dishing out 6 bases to everybody, to each person, and you choose 3 of those. So it's this asymmetric starting right off the bat. What else you can do? You can bank water. You can, if you don't have anything much going on this round, you can get a water tower for 1 water, and that'll give you 4 waters next round. Typically, you're going to only have 3 waters around. You can bank a water tower to give yourself 4 waters for the next round. And you also have this Raiders card that kind of moves the game right along. Once that Raiders card is an event, once that happens, it does 1 damage to your opponent's base. So that keeps the game moving too. So quick moving, scarce resources, tough to get the cards out, a little bit of chance to see what your opponent's trying to do before they're going to attack you or smash you or whatever. And you also have a chance to respawn. So I don't know, Chris, you tell me, does that sound like anything you've ever played?
Sort of. And I want to play this game so badly. It sounds like so much fun. One question that it raises, why is it that we are so convinced that in the future, everybody is going to have mohawks in the dystopian wasteland of the future days? That's thing number one. But I also wanted to ask, do you think it's worth the investment to get the deluxe version now that you own it?
That's a good question. The deluxe version gets you, I think, just the 2 play mats. What else? There's the clicky clacky water things. I think that just comes in the regular deluxe. The super deluxe, I think, comes with a playmat. Regular deluxe just has the resin water tiles that come in white and black. And then the standard just has the cardboard chits for the water. And I think the price is something like 50, 30, and 20. So would I pay that much for the mats? You know what? I really, really like them. It helps keep the game organized. If you have the space and the money, why not get them? Are they necessary? No, not at all. But it helps for the layout, helps for the organization. It's pretty. They're gorgeous. So if you want a little extra art, a little extra flair, I say go for the super deluxe. If you don't care about that stuff, then you don't need it. Not at all. So that's where I sit with that, Chris.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think the first person that I heard about this game from was Board Game Chatterbox back when she was first getting it. Her advice was, don't waste your time with the deluxe version, go with the standard. But I know you're also, like me, you're kind of a big production person, so I wonder if that's the kind of thing I would want to invest in, the player mats.
I love the neoprene mats. They make it easier to pop up the card and pop back down if you don't have if you're trying to play on a table, that might cause some damage to the cards, quite honestly. Because in this game, sometimes you're putting cards face down out on your tableau and you're having to pop them back up and put them in your hand or put them back in the discard pile and flip them here, flip them there. So there's a lot of shuffling around. Just the fact that you have these neoprene mats might actually help protect the cards, which are just incredibly high quality. Like I said, they almost feel weighted or something. So I don't have them sleeved because I just really like the feel of these cards in my hand. But yeah, I say go for the mats. Chris, you had anything on your table lately?
So, oh boy, where do I begin? I'm going to talk tonight about the one game that if someone said, this is what we're playing tonight, I would excuse myself and not go. The one game that I would absolutely turn down and say, no, thank you. Diplomacy, one of the great granddaddies of modern board gaming. And modern is, I use the term loosely here because the game was developed in 1959 by Alan B. Calhamer, and published by Avalon Hill Games. This has such a storied history to it. I actually listened to a really interesting podcast on this one. Royce Calverley of the Definitely a Board Game podcast did a really interesting comparison between Diplomacy and Dominant Species, which he said are 2 of his favorite games. It was interesting hearing some of the history that he laid out. Like, apparently this was one of JFK's favorite games. I mean, how many games can say that, right? The game itself is so simple because really all you're doing is every turn you're moving around this map of Europe in roughly World War I era, and then resolving combats based on the places that people try to move. So if two people try to move into one territory, whoever has the more strength associated with them is going to win that territory. And then at the other end of that year, they get to build new units based on the territories that they own. And that's really the entire game. But the reason why this ends up being such a big thing, even with such a simple rule set, is it's the diplomacy piece, which of course is the name of the game. The way you're supposed to approach this game is that at every turn, everybody kind of goes off into their little groups and goes from, talks to individual people. Say, I may go talk to Adam and say, hey, Adam, let's team up on Tim. And then later on, I go to Tim and say, hey, Tim, let's team up on Adam. And the whole idea is everybody's lying to everybody, that you're expecting to get screwed over by your friends. And then the turns get laid out on pieces of paper. They get basically thrown in a pile. And then you look at them all and you resolve all of those turns. And that's when you find out whether you were lied to or whether somebody was working with you or working against you. It is really less a game of strategy than it is a game of, can I get one over on you? Now, there's a little bit of editorializing there, but I think that's really kind of what this game is all about. And I just do not like that. We talked about some of our least favorite mechanisms in several episodes back. That kind of negotiation and alliance building is one of the things that I really dislike. And in particular in this game, because it is so expected that you're going to end up being cheated by your friends. I just have a hard time with that. Plus, I played it on an online platform where, unfortunately, what that meant was each round, during the time when if you were playing it live, you would be going off, taking your friend off into a room and going to talk to them about whatever it is you need to talk to them about. You're sending emails back and forth, these diplomatic communiques to the other players. And for one, I just found that really kind of oppressive, having to do all that back and forth, and the turns go about 3 days at a turn, so people have an opportunity to go back and forth by email. And depending on the people you're playing with, some people were just like, hey, let's attack so-and-so. Other people were writing these like dissertations on, let me tell you 5 moves out what I think you ought to be doing, because I think it's really going to help you, and I think that's really going to help me. And this is the first time I had played, and I was playing with a group of people who have played it before. And after move number 1, I'm like, I so badly want to resign this game and just get the hell out of here. But I didn't want to be a party pooper, so I kept at it. But I just didn't have the stamina to keep up with like the barrage of emails and the barrage of explanations and suggestions. It just beat me down so badly. So between that and just the general dislike that I have of that kind of diplomatic type of game, that kind of alliance building, I just, such a bad feeling about that game. I would turn that down and say no thank you. I just wouldn't want to play this again. One play was enough for me.
I was working on my MBA in college, going to classes after a long day of work. I was in this business ethics class or something like that. But we got into a chapter on negotiations. And so the instructor led us into this thing and said, okay, well, what I want you to do is go into this other room and you're going to negotiate with one of the people from the other teams. It's a company you're negotiating with. And you're going to win if everybody comes out ahead. And so, I talked to my team and I went and I negotiated with this classmate and, kind of set up, okay, this is what we're going to do. So if you guys will do this for us, we'll do this for you. But it's not binding. So when she went to her room and said, hey, this is the deal they want to give us, I went to my room and I said, I think they're going to take this deal, so let's switch it up on them a little bit, right? So I kind of did the diplomacy thing on them. And we ended up winning. We ended up getting a better deal. They got screwed out of it because she took my word for it, and I kind of took advantage of that trust. And I always hated myself for that. Not only that, I was single at the time. She was this beautiful woman, super friendly. We had a lot of chemistry going, and I never got a date after that. So this is why I will never play diplomacy.
I feel like this game could just be called Who is the Best Manipulator? I have no desire to play this one. It makes me sick thinking about it. I don't want to, it just makes my stomach have knots. I don't know, man. I don't know, Chris. Is there anything that would ever make you go back and play this game again?
No, there's absolutely nothing about this game that I enjoyed. Absolutely nothing that would ever make me go back to this game again. And I'm an attorney. I mean, I negotiate for a living, but I work in a world where people don't really straight out lie to each other because no one will ever trust you again. And in this game, you expect it. You go into it going, everybody's going to lie to me. So I went into it saying, I'm just going to be the guy who tells the truth and it's going to screw me and I don't care because I just don't have the energy to spend all this time lying. And I did end up losing, but I wasn't the first person out, so I didn't lose entirely. So yay for me.
Congrats, Chris, on your not first person out.
Thanks, Tim.
Right.
So Tim, hopefully you've got better news on your table than I had on mine.
I think I did. I got a chance to play Space Station Phoenix, which is a new game by Rio Grande Games. The designer is Gabriel J. Cohn. Now, Rio Grande Games, I think, has done a really good job recently of identifying some great and unique designs. Beyond the Sun is a recent Rio Grande design. Underwater Cities was published in the US by Rio Grande. So I think Rio Grande, who, you know, their development team, their publishing team can pick out these games and find some really fun gems. The problem with Rio Grande is that their productions are nothing to write home about. And so they don't tend to stand out. They don't tend to get a lot of attention. But I think they're still worth checking out because they pick some really clever games. And Space Station Phoenix is no exception. This is a fairly light engine building game, although there's a few mechanisms going on that are interesting. Basically, you start the game by drafting 7 cards, and these 7 cards end up being the types of actions that you have available to use during your turn. You could kind of think of them as worker placement actions, but instead of placing a worker, you're spending gems, and each of them has a different cost. So at the beginning of the game, I think you start with like 20 gems, and maybe one of them costs 4, one of them costs 7. So you might have like 3 or 4 actions you can take in the first round. One of the clever things, though, is you can take actions with your own cards, but you can also take actions with any of your neighbor's cards. And when you do that, you pay a couple extra gems and they get to keep them. So there's this little economy going on. Basically, what you're trying to do with these cards is you're going to be generating some additional resources, or you're going to be building parts on a space station. That's kind of the key of the game. You're trying to build the best space station. But how do you build a space station? You need raw materials. You need metal. And the only way you can get metal in this world, in this economy, is by scrapping one of your ships. Your ships are these action cards that you've got. So if you want to get the metal to build a space station, part of your space station, you actually have to destroy one of your cards that you've got, one of the actions you have available. That's kind of the clever thing about this game, is that you might destroy one action. Now you can no longer generate plants, for example, which can be an important resource, but one of your neighbors can still do it. So it's going to cost you a little bit more to do it, but now you've got metal and you can build a space station unit with that. Why do you want to build out your space station? Once you build a space station unit out, you can start to invite visitors. These are going to be aliens, different species of aliens that will come and visit your space station. And you basically, I think if I remember right, it's got 3 different wings. So you can build a level 1, 2, and 3 of each of these different wings of your space station. And each of those wings can hold a different type of alien. And so one of the other actions you can take during the course of the game is to turn in resources to get aliens to come visit your space station. So once you've built one, you can start to add aliens to your space station. And when you run out of gems on your turn, you would instead take an income action. An income action will give you some gems based on your cards, but it will also give you additional resources based on the number of aliens you have in your space station units. And each of these space station units, these parts you're building on, are all unique. And so it's a little bit of a race for the best parts to your space station, trying to build up this fun little engine that you can do. So it's a quick engine builder. That's all about I have to say about it. It's not super complex, but pretty fun, pretty clever, unique in that you have to destroy your actions to build. So you kind of destroy your engine to build up a different engine. And I thought that was a really interesting set of mechanisms. So I'd be happy to go back to this again. It wasn't something that I'm going to rush out to buy, but this is on Board Game Arena. I think I played it on beta. Really fun, quick game to play on Board Game Arena.
This game sounds fun. I'd love to get this one to the table. I know Shut Up and Sit Down just did a big review, so it's probably getting a lot of press right now too. I would like to try this one very much.
It sounds like a pretty clever idea, the whole destroying your ships to build out your engine. I mean, sounds like some pretty tough choices to make.
How is the weight of this one compared to like Beyond the Sun, and what are your thoughts? Compare it with Beyond the Sun. It sounds totally different. But...
Yeah, I would say it's lighter. I think it's pretty much lighter than Beyond the Sun. This is more of an engine builder. It's probably a little more complex than something like Splendor or space base, but it felt similar as far as that it's very simple little engine builder, not too many strategic choices to make every turn, and pretty simple mechanisms that are happening there. A little bit, very, very mid-weight, I would say.
Okay, more complex and more going on than Furnace.
I would say a little bit more. Yeah, a little bit more going on than Furnace. Not too much though. It's just a little bit heavier than that. So yeah, it's right in there. It's right in that, like, it's not a mid heavyweight. It's a very much a midweight, almost a light midweight game. I don't know. It's like that 2 point. It's probably in that. I bet if I looked it up on Board Game Geek right now, I bet it's in like that 2.5. Yeah, I'm seeing it's 2.88 as a weight. So sub 3, pretty easy to get into. When I sat down to play it, I didn't actually learn it. I kind of glanced at the rules and then started playing, and I didn't know exactly what I was doing the first turn or two, but it didn't take me long at all to really figure out all my options available. And so, yeah, pretty easy to get into. All right, cool. Well, I think that will wrap up this episode of Board Game Hot Takes. Before we close out for today, though, I did want to invite you as a listener, if you're enjoying the show, find us on your favorite podcast app or wherever and leave us a rating or review. Apple Podcasts, I think, is the most common. But we did get a really nice review from a listener this last week, so I wanted to read it out and give them a little bit of a shout out. This is from Boss Dad LDOE. I don't know what LDOE stands for, but that's who left this. The title was one of my favorites, and he said, or they said, I assume it's he since it's Boss Dad, so I'll just go with that. As a board game designer, I listen almost exclusively to board game podcasts, and this one has become one of my favorites. So many games are constantly coming out that no one can play them all, but I really want and need to stay on top of all the latest and greatest games, new mechanisms, best art, and most interesting themes. Tim, Chris, and Adam really keep me in the know on all the latest hotness and classic titles too. They bring the experience of true board game aficionados with thousands of gameplays under their belts and provide educated and expert analysis that help me decide which games I need to play and which to leave on the shelf. Beyond that, you can just tell that they're great friends who love playing games together, and they create a chemistry in their show that make them a joy to listen to. Thanks, guys, and keep on gaming and bringing us all your hot takes. What a nice review, and I appreciate you calling it a relationship. I have a great time playing with these guys every week, but I never in my wildest dreams expected to be called educated or expert based on this podcast. So thank you. That was a very nice surprise to read this week.
Yeah, he's got some adjectives, aficionados. I think he got that one wrong too. So, some critiques of that very, very kind review there. Thank you so much.
What does aficionado mean? Just kidding. No, that's very nice.
Anyway, if you enjoy the show, hang out with us on Twitter at BG_hot takes or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.